The world lost Miss Country Soul when Jeannie Seely died on August 2025. The voice, the miniskirts, and the more than 5,000 Opry appearances were all recalled by fans. Most people were unaware, however, that Jeannie had been maintaining a private archive behind the music, which would stay closed until her last curtain call. Her Nashville home's doors were silently unlocked in the days following her memorial service at the Grand Ole Opry House. There were unexpected items inside, amidst the cozy, well-known atmosphere of her living room and the photo-lined bookcases. A 1966 Grammy Still Shining, clothes for the stage that were both inspiring and scandalizing. The lyrics to music that the general public had never heard were handwritten. Letters that were so intimate that they showed a side of Jeannie Seely that her admirers were unaware of. Then there was the little closed box on the dresser in her bedroom. Nobody would reveal what was within. Wrapped in the life of a lady who never ceased producing history, these gems remained concealed for decades. To find out what Jeannie Seely's loved ones discovered when the music eventually stopped, we'll take you inside her life and the estate she left behind today. The narrative of Jeannie Seely started in the tiny Pennsylvanian hamlet of Titusville on July 6, 1940. In this working-class neighborhood, which was encircled by farms and undulating hills, hard work was not only required but also a way of life. In addition to instilling a strong sense of discipline in Jeannie and her siblings, her parents, Leo and Irene, fostered her passion for music. The family's radio, which brought the distinctive sound of the Grand Ole Opry into their home every Saturday night, helped to sow that love early. She had her first appearance in front of a microphone on local radio at the age of 11. The spark was there, but so were the nerves. Something ignited her when she performed in front of an audience, even one she couldn't see. She started making appearances on local television shows by the time she was a teenager. Her resolve and smile were both reflected by the studio's strong lights. She started honing the singing technique that would eventually lead to her being dubbed Miss Country Soul during those years. It was more than simply striking the notes. It was about sensing them. There was grit and warmth in her voice, the kind of tone that sharpened the pain of heartbreak and brightened the sound of joy. She moved west after high school, drawn by the lure of greater ambitions. In the early 1960s, she relocated to California and worked night jobs and office jobs to support herself. By day, she was a secretary at Liberty Records, drafting notes and filing documents for other people's careers, while secretly believing her own was imminent. She practiced her trade at coffee shops and small clubs on the weekends, singing anywhere she could. She met songwriter Hank Cochran in California, thanks to fate. They had an immediate creative connection, and Hank would go on to write "Don't Touch Me," the song that transformed her life. Something remarkable occurred when she recorded it in 1966. On the country charts, the single shot to number 2. Radios all throughout America were broadcasting her voice. She became one of Nashville's most regarded talents, after winning the Grammy Award for Best Female Country Vocal Performance, for the song's emotional appeal and distinctive delivery. She relocated to Music City that same year. Nashville was a different world. It was more conventional, ruled by men, and occasionally reluctant to accept outsiders. Jeannie, however, came with a purpose and a lot of momentum. Soon after, she received an invitation to perform at the Grand Ole Opry. She was admitted as a full member in 1967. It was more than simply a career achievement for Jeannie. The ideal she'd had since those Saturday evenings in Titusville was finally coming true. She started gathering mementos, ticket stubs, performance programs, and pictures of herself with other musicians as soon as she walked onto that renowned stage. Nobody gave it much thought at the time, but in hindsight, those early mementos ended up becoming the first items in the private collection that would eventually make up her fortune. She was unique even in her early Opry days. She stood out for the way she presented herself and her musical taste. She didn't hesitate to push the limits of genres by fusing soulful delivery with country storytelling. In the background, she was subtly going against the grain and preserving every remnant of her voyage. Maybe one day those objects would be able to convey the story more effectively than words ever could. Jeannie Seely would become a well-known Opry stalwart and a voice of her generation in the years that followed. Her personal history was as well preserved as her music, but those who knew her well recognized that she was also an archive of her own life. Because of this, some of the most heartwarming discoveries made when her estate was eventually uncovered decades later came from these very beginnings. A Pennsylvania girl who dared to dream her way to Nashville left behind yellowed newspaper clippings, handwritten set lists, and delicate pictures. Jeannie Seely had already established herself with Don't Touch Me in her Grammy victory by 1967, when she was accepted into the Grand Ole Opry. Being a formal member, however, was more than just a privilege. It was a chance to influence the organization from within, and Jeannie didn't intend to blend in when she entered those backstage doors. The Opie had a long history and had represented the conservative side of country music on its stage for many years. Women in modest outfits, males in suits. Although Jeannie valued the past, she also thought that the music and its performers could be daring, contemporary, and relevant. The night she appeared on the Opie stage in a miniskirt caused her first significant commotion. The crowd let out a gasp. The photographers took pictures. Backstage, the rumors circulated swiftly. Have you noticed Selele's attire? It was more than just a style decision. It was a declaration. She then moved on to pantsuits, go-go boots, and finally jeans, clothing that was almost unheard of for a female upstage performer. A few conservatives scowled. Younger spectators applauded. Jeannie opened the door for women in country music to express themselves freely by doing this. She quickly achieved another first, because to her charm and self-assurance, she was the first woman to host Grand Ole Opry broadcast segments on a regular basis. Even the doubters were won over by Jeannie's effortless humor and command of the stage, despite the fact that it was a character that was customarily assigned to men. She never let the spotlight scare her, mocked her fellow artists, and maintained the excitement. She also started to establish her distinctive rapport with audiences throughout these years. Jeannie interacted with fans like friends. In contrast to many celebrities who kept a certain distance, years later, she frequently remembered names and faces, took the time to listen, and signed each autograph. She would become adored by generations of country music fans because of this trait. She was quietly adding to her expanding archive behind the scenes. Jackets from TV appearances, boots worn during milestone performances, and wardrobe items that created a stir during these years were all meticulously preserved. Tucked away in drawers and clothing bags were playbills from the evenings she hosted, pictures of herself alongside legends like Porter Wagner and Loretta Lynn, and even her own show scripts from Opry broadcasts. Decades later, some of these things would be discovered just as she left them. Polaroids that documented unscripted backstage moments, programs with her brief notes scrawled in the margins, and costumes that still smelled of stage makeup. These were more than just artifacts from her career. To the admirers who would later view them, they were real-time photos of a lady changing the rules. Jeannie also increased the scope of her partnerships in the late 1960s and early 1970s. She performed a number of duet singles with Jack Green, such as Wish I Didn't Have to Miss You. They had an unrelenting touring schedule and an unquestionable synergy on stage and in the studio. Their harmonies combined to create something more than the sum of their individual parts. As they performed to crowded houses, Jeannie continued to be an Opry mainstay despite living life in the fast lane. She frequently performed on the road one night and returned to Nashville the following night to perform at the Ryman. She saw the Opry as her musical home, and the assortment of mementos she was assembling from this era demonstrated how important it was to her. During these years, Jeannie Seely transformed from a Grammy-winning upstart to a cultural icon at the Grand Ole Opry. She was doing more than simply singing. She was changing the idea of what a country music woman could be. And her fans' recollections wouldn't be the only evidence of that change. It would reside in her home's photo albums, drawers, and closets, just waiting to be found when the music eventually stopped. The majority of fans fell in love with Jeannie Seely's voice first, but her writing was equally potent. She had solidified her reputation as more than just a performer by the early 1970s. Her songs were both commercially successful and emotionally impactful. Her songs were recorded by artists including as Connie Smith, Ernest Tubb, Willie Nelson, Doy West, and Merle Haggard. Seely's distinctive fusion of melodic grace and straightforward honesty was evident in every lyric. Writing, she once said, is a means to process the things you can't say aloud. Additionally, the songs she wrote frequently exposed realities that were not always able to be expressed in interviews or on stage. A profound comprehension of human feelings served as the inspiration for all of them, whether they were personal or completely fictional. Beyond songwriting credits, she collaborated with others. She established herself as a mainstay of country music in the 1970s century by performing duets with Jack Green on stage. Hits like Can I Sleep in Your Arms and Much Obliged attracted a receptive audience. However, it wasn't always a simple journey. Long distances from home, missed family gatherings, and the never-ending pressure to produce hit after hit were all part of touring. Seeley had a range of highs and lows in her personal life during these years. She had experienced both emotional and creative hardship from her first marriage to singer Hank Cochran. There was no denying their artistic affinity. Don't Touch Me was actually written by Hank. However, the relationship soon suffered from the strain of two hard occupations. Despite their divorce, they continued to respect one another as colleagues. The late 1970s and early 1980s were a time of transition in the music business. The sound of country music was changing, being increasingly influenced by pop. Some artists were marginalized by the emerging trends. But even when radio play wasn't as robust as it was during her top chart years, Jeannie adjusted and kept performing, writing, and appearing on the Opry stage. The fact that Jeannie was also covertly conserving the relics of her voyage during these decades was unknown to anybody outside of her immediate circle. She maintained a pile of spiral notebooks with song lyrics, many of which were unreleased, in a desk drawer in her home office. Some had chord notations in the margins and were almost finished. Others were bits and pieces, a sentence scrawled on the back of an envelope, a chorus without a home, a single stanza. Those notebooks were among the most unexpected discoveries made at the 2025 estate opening. Although her composer skills were well known to her fans, the sheer amount of unreleased music demonstrated how prolific she had been. There were also private letters tucked in between the pages, some from fans and some from other musicians who had written to her about how a song had impacted their lives. A tiny filing cabinet in a different part of her house contained manila folders with the names Merle, Willie, and Doy written on them. It contained handwritten letters, recording session images, and contracts for songs she had co-written or sold. Someone who recognized the cabinet's worth long before the rest of the world did maintained it, making it a time capsule of Nashville's heyday. One work in particular stood out among all the others from this era: a simple kitchen demos cassette tape. On it, unpolished and personal, Jeannie's voice drifted over the strum of an acoustic guitar. These work tapes, which captured her creativity in its most unadulterated state, were never intended for public publication. It seemed to admirers and historians that her home's walls had been preserving a covert performance for decades. For Jeannie Seeley, the 1970s and 1980s were a period of artistic, emotional, and professional perseverance. She continued to write, to act, and to discreetly preserve the material fragments of her story against every obstacle. Those sculptures, which provided an unvarnished glimpse of the artist behind the stage lights, would subsequently become some of the most exposed aspects of her estate decades later. Jeannie Seeley had nothing more to prove by the time she was in her 80s. She was already the Grand Ole Opry's most frequent performer, a Grammy winner, a songwriter whose songs had been recorded by legendary singers, and a role model for innumerable up-and-coming musicians. She continued to be busy, though, recording new music, appearing frequently at the Opry, and hosting Willie's Roadhouse on Sirius XM. Her marriage to Nashville lawyer Gene Ward served as the cornerstone of her private life. Through peaceful evenings at home, time spent with family, and a mutual affection for their cat, Corey, the two established a strong friendship that transcended the spotlight. However, Gene died in late 2024, thus Jeannie was left without her best friend. In the months that followed, friends claimed she pushed herself even more into her music, determined to keep going. But it was getting difficult to ignore her health. Long hospital stays, back surgery, and abdominal operations were all costly. She fought pneumonia in the spring of 2025 and was admitted to the intensive care unit. She did, however, return to the Opry stage, with the same fervor and wit that had characterized her for decades. A few weeks prior to her passing on August 2025, she made her last public appearance. She left this earth with her legacy intact at the age of 85. There was still one more narrative to be told, though, for those who knew her best. Her Nashville house was opened within days after her memorial service, which was labeled her 398th Opry performance. Friends and relatives started the meticulous process of going through a lifetime's worth of possessions within. The extent of Jeannie's private collection became clear at this point. The Grammy she had won in 1966 was on top of a glass cabinet in her living room. With its gold surface gleaming in the morning light, much as it must have on the day she acquired it, it appeared nearly undamaged. Stage costumes spanning 6 decades were stored on nearby clothing racks. The denim jackets she wore later in life, the glittering gowns from television specials, and the notorious minikirts that once made headlines. A separate aspect of the collection was shown in her home office. The walls were lined with framed photos of her, with her Opry co-workers. But the whole story was revealed in the cupboards and drawers. These were the well-arranged handwritten lyric notebooks, many of which had dates and little personal remarks in the margins. Bundled with ribbon were Hank Cochran's letters, some tender, some strictly business-related. Notes from recording sessions, tour schedules, and candid images were all in folders marked with the names of other performers. Then came the more intimate gems. A well-worn leather-bound journal with observations from life on the road, a stack of old play money with her name in large print, and her first Opry membership card. Fans discovered a number of cookbooks on a tiny bookshelf, many of which had handwritten recipes that provided insight into the private life she rarely talked about in public. And the most talked about object of all, a small closed box, was sitting on the dresser in her bedroom. Its contents have not been made public, and its key was nowhere to be found. Fans' curiosity has been fueled by friends and family's silence. Was it a collection of financial records, love letters, or a last unheard song? She is only told by those closest to her, and they are keeping it a secret. It is evident that Jeannie Seely did more than simply live her life. She kept a record of it. Each outfit, set list, and picture represented a strand in the greater fabric of her career. When her estate was eventually opened, it showed not only a celebrity's belongings, but also a woman's life in all its splendor, meticulously kept for such an occasion. One question persisted among fans and industry insiders in the days after Jeannie Seely's death. And what of all the things she left behind? According to people close to Jeannie, her will is well organized and reflects the same level of care she took in managing her career. Even if it has not been made public, there hasn't been any outward indication of disagreement, in contrast to many celebrity properties. According to friends, Jeannie was committed to avoiding the types of family conflicts that frequently eclipse a legacy. Although she had no biological children, her stepchildren and their families, with whom she had a close relationship, are said to be among the main beneficiaries. In addition, there is a great deal of conjecture that a sizable amount of her collection will eventually end up in public archives, guaranteeing that her history will always be available to the people who cheered her on for almost 60 years. When asked where her most famous works may end up, people have pointed to the Smithsonian, the Grand Ole Opry Archives, and the Country Music Hall of Fame Museum. The original lyric sheets for Don't Touch Me, her first Opry membership card, and the 1966 Grammy are all clear contenders for museum exhibits. These are more than simply items. They are physical representations of how a girl from Pennsylvania changed the stage and fashion of Nashville. However, not everything is meant for museum plaques and glass cases. Friends think that some of her personal belongings, including her handwritten recipes, leather-bound notebook, and private letters, will stay with the family. These are the types of mementos that are more emotionally significant than their historical significance. They address Jeannie, the wife, the friend, the woman who enjoyed cooking, laughing, and sharing stories at the kitchen table, rather than Jeannie Seely, the Opry legend. The locked box comes next. Its mystery has already become part of her posthumous lore, regardless of what it contains. Some people think it includes unfinished songs that might be her final compositions. Others believe it might include private correspondence she wants to remain unpublished for all time. The mystery surrounding her life and the things she decided to disclose has guaranteed that the discussion about it will go on for years, regardless of the reality. But her legacy extends beyond the things she left behind. She did this by pushing the limits of what a woman in country music might be. She wrote songs that stood up to the biggest stars in the industry, conducted Opie segments with elegance and power, and questioned outmoded clothing rules. She continued to perform well into her 80s, demonstrating that persistence in the entertainment industry is achievable when skill and willpower are supported with genuineness. Tributes from all throughout the business flooded in the weeks following her passing. She has a golden heart and is a force of nature, according to Dolly Parton. Both young and veteran Opry singers told of her generosity backstage, how she welcomed newcomers, gave advice without being patronizing, and conducted herself with the quiet assurance of someone who had earned her seat at the table. The estate of Jeannie Seely is more than just a collection of souvenirs. It serves as a blueprint for a profession based on aptitude, tenacity, and a refusal to fit in. Its contents, whether they are kept in museums, inherited by family, or hidden up forever, convey a story that cannot be repeated. They serve as a reminder that artists leave behind more than just their accolades and costumes. These are the times, the chances, and the decisions that made their lives memorable. And perhaps the most significant finding of all for the admirers who followed her from Titusville to the Opry stage is the knowledge that her legacy will live on in public places and in the hearts of people who knew her. The influence of Jeannie Seal extends beyond the music she created and the records she broke. She demonstrated charity to those who shared her stage, broke down barriers, and conducted herself with dignity. The final private encore provided by her estate serves as a reminder that every song and performance is a life full of treasured memories. See here for more heartfelt tales.